In much of her work, the church historian Diana Butler Bass, she talks about the Great Reversal. And what she's talking about is this movement from believe, behave, belong, to reversing it to belong, behave, believe. And so to summarize for you some of her work, what she essentially says is this: for the past few centuries, Western Christianity, both Protestants and Catholics, they've ordered the faith in a very particular way. Believe, behave, belong. And church has taken this pattern and then set a group of rituals to it. And you can see this from the time of a baby all the way into adulthood. I mean, think about it. A baby is baptized or dedicated in the church in some traditions. And the parents will stand in front of the congregation and answer questions about what they believe, and they'll make promises to train that child, teach them the faith. And then from there, that child will go into catechism or Sunday school classes where they will learn the doctrines or the beliefs of that system. And they'll be learning the intellectual content of that particular tradition. And then from believe, they can move on to that next stage, behave, where they graduate from Sunday school into big church. Y'all ever call it big church? They come upstairs and they can participate in the adult practices like worship and prayer and giving or tithing. And then from there, once they nail behavior down and they behave correctly, then you can move to that third and final stage where you're offered full membership into the church through communion or confirmation, and you can belong. It is how we have read the religious script for the last few hundred years. Believe like us, behave like us, and then you can become one of us and belong. But see, the thing is, it was not always this way. It's a fairly new movement in the last 500 years or so. Because about 500 years ago, the Western Christianity, the church, split from a single church into 5 major different church families. It's where we got Roman Catholicism, Lutheranism, Anglicanism, Reformed Christianity, and the Anabaptist faith. And check this out. See if this sounds familiar. They started to argue and debate. Nah, we don't see this happening today at all, do we? They started debate about who was more right. Who held the real truth? Who was more biblical? And see, what that did is set us down this journey of putting religion in the category of you either believe in religion or you don't believe in religion. We put God in the box. You either believe in God or you don't believe in God. Here's what Diana Butler Bass says in her book. I highly recommend it, by the way. It's called Christianity After Religion. She says this: thus, for several centuries, Western people have generally assumed that religious commitment begins when one assents to a body of organized doctrines. This holds true if you are considering changing churches or are having a faith crisis. If you are no longer comfortable being a Catholic, you look about to find a church that teaches divorce is acceptable. If you no longer want to be a fundamentalist, you find a church that teaches that the Bible is not literally true. You find out what a group teaches, and you wrestle with its ideas. Joining depends on whether or not you agree with its creed or statement of faith or doctrine. If you find its ideas about God sensible or truthful, then you reshape your life accordingly by learning new prayers, serving the poor, giving up smoking or drinking, and trying to be a better person. Finally, you become a member and join the church. However, it's all a bit odd, isn't it? Because that's not the way most of us function in our lives. I mean, think about the groups you have become part of. Think about the communities you have joined, aside from a political party. I mean, weren't you asking different kinds of questions? My guess is you did not go to that group and say, well, just tell me what you believe about this subject or about this topic, and then I'll decide if I want to become one of you. No, that's not how it worked. No, you became a part of that hiking club or the camping club or that knitting group or the motorcycle gang because you found some sense of belonging. a deepening of relationships, right? It addressed a fundamental question inside of you of who are you? I mean, isn't that why most of you are here today? Because you experience some sense of belonging here at St. Luke's. My guess is, for most of you, you did not lay out all the documents of religion. You did not lay out all the doctrines of all the different Christian denominations and read through them and say, boom, United Methodist doctrine, baby, that's me. That's where I align. You didn't do that, right? Because it starts with belonging. And it's not that behavior and belief aren't important, but that's not where we start. We start with belonging. And my friends, the religious script is being played backwards. In our culture, this is true. It is a matter of whether or not we decide to read it that way and whether or not we decide to pay attention. And see, I first learned that the religious script was being played backwards back in 2007. That's when I became aware of it. Because in 2007, I became a campus minister. Before coming here to St. Luke's, I was in campus ministry for 5 years. I was the director of the Wesley Foundation Campus Ministry, United Methodist Campus Ministry at the University of Denver while I was in seminary at Iliff School of Theology. And I was brought in to essentially do a restart because the ministry had been non-existent for at least the last decade. And so my first week as the director of the Wesley Foundation, I went to the Pioneer Carnival. DU every year holds the Pioneer Carnival. It's where you go in the gymnasium and you can set up a booth if you're an organization or a ministry. And so we had our booth set up and all our signage, big signs that say the Wesley Foundation. And we had pretty pamphlets to hand out to talk about who we are and what we believe. And you could even get creative and put your logo on water bottles and hand out water bottles. And see, here's what I learned. On that day and in my first year, not one student ever asked me, hey, can you just tell me what you believe about God and religion? And then I just want to mull it over and then I'll let you know if I want to join. No. Not one student in my 5 years of working with hundreds of students said to me, hey, I grew up United Methodist, so I'm just looking for a United Methodist campus ministry. No. They were asking questions about who are you? What are you about in the world? What are you doing to create a positive difference in the world? And see, we had this other problem too. Because students started sending me emails, and I'd see them on campus, and they say, what's up, Wesley? Wesley, why are you calling? Oh, you actually thought I would be dumb enough to start a ministry and call it by my last name, by my first name, the Wesley Foundation. And so I go to the board of the directors at the end of the first year and I said, look, we have to get rid of Wesley. We can keep Wesley on paper, and y'all know where Wesley comes from, right? John Wesley, founder of Methodism. Not a huge draw for college students anyway. So let's get rid of Wesley. We can keep it on paper, but let's just become the Foundation Campus Ministry. So the next year when I went to the Pioneer Carnival, we had the Foundation Campus Ministry, and we made it our goal to be the only organization in that gymnasium that would not be handing out anything. No pamphlets, no water bottles, no homemade cookies, no candy bags. We were the only organization in that gymnasium that had a table, and we had peanut butter and jelly and bread and brown sack bags and bananas, and we invited each student that came by to make a lunch. And then we invited those students to then join us that afternoon and every single week to go down to El Centro Humanitario, a place where day laborers are. And we served lunch, and we hung out with them, and we built relationships with them every single week. And students, man, they would dig that. Found a sense of belonging in that. By my third year as a director there, one of our most active students was an atheist, self-proclaimed atheist. He started coming because he loved the idea of making lunch and then going downtown to build relationships with people that he wouldn't otherwise interact with. He was the first one to show up, the last one to leave. And see, what happened is, after he had that sense of belonging, he started asking these deep religious questions. Questions about particular biblical passages and questions about Jesus. And see, then what happened is, I would love to tell you he became a Christ follower. He was no longer an atheist. I don't know if that's true, but what I can tell you is his hatred, his despising of Christianity and the church, it began to lessen a lot. Why? Because it starts with belonging. It's always started with belonging. And I think this is actually faithful to the earliest Christian tradition as well as the Scriptures. Because when you read through the Gospels, you never see Jesus saying, "Come believe in me. Come on, man, that's what I need from you. I need you to come believe in me." Jesus never said that. Jesus always said, "Come follow me. Come follow me. Let's go change the world together. Be part of this. Let's go change the world. Come follow me." I mean, this is who Jesus was. It's always been about belonging. And by the way, why is this important? Why does it matter? Because how many people have you known? How many people have you encountered? Starting perhaps with your family and loved ones and close friends. How many people have you known that some sort of religious narrative came along and told them that they weren't really welcome? No matter how crafty we get with the mission statement or the church marquees, God loves all people welcome here. How many people do you know that were actually told that they truly don't belong when it comes to the Christian faith? Man, I was in the Florence maximum security prison just this Monday morning, and 3 inmates, 3 separate times, came up to me and said, "Pastor, and I'm getting out of here soon." And they weren't from Colorado, from a different state. "Getting out of here soon. Do you know of a church that will accept me?" Think of what they're asking. In other words, "Pastor, do you know of a place where I will belong?" See, it matters, doesn't it? So I want to explore with you a story about belonging. It comes from the Old Testament, a book called 2 Samuel. It's a story about David and Mephibosheth. Y'all say that name with me, Mephibosheth. But you got to say it like this, Mephibosheth. I don't know why I'm saying it that way, but it's just Mephibosheth. Anyways, 2 Samuel, if you like Game of Thrones and Walking Dead, you will absolutely dig 2 Samuel because it is packed full of action. And here's the backstory to David and Mephibosheth. Now, David, same David as David and Goliath, that David, early 2 Samuel, he wasn't yet king. Saul was king. Remember King Saul? Saul had sons. One of those sons' name was Jonathan. Jonathan and David were really, really close. They were tight. In fact, early in 2 Samuel, David says to Jonathan, "Jonathan, your love for me is better than that of a woman." And he says, "Jonathan, look, you need to know I'm your man. Like if anything ever happens to you, I am going to take care of your family." David was this upcoming star. Something did happen to Jonathan that day because they, the Israelites, were in this long, drawn-out battle with the Philistines. In that battle at Gilboa, King Saul was killed. Jonathan was killed along with all of Saul's sons, including Jonathan. Killed. Here's what the text says. A servant of Jonathan's, hold on, we're not there yet. A servant of Jonathan's was watching this battle take place, and she sees Jonathan's 5-year-old son on the battlefield. His name is Mephibosheth. And so she knows what's happening. If the king is killed and the king's son is killed, who's next in line to be king? Mephibosheth, 5 years old. He's now a threat to the kingdom. He can't be king at 5. He's a threat to the kingdom. And so she runs out on the battlefield, not making this up. Read 2 Samuel. She grabs him, picks him up, and starts running to a place of safety. And as she's running, she trips and falls, and she drops 5-year-old Mephibosheth, and both of his feet are permanently broken. Not just injured, but permanently broken. Now, why is that significant? Because in that time and in that day, if your feet were permanently broken, you were a nobody. You were marginalized. You were put to shame. You couldn't engage in war. You couldn't raise a family. You couldn't tend to the fields. Fast forward some years. David has now become king. Mephibosheth is still a threat. He was next in line. The king comes to Saul's household of his family, and he has this conversation. 2 Samuel chapter 9, David asked, "Is there anyone from Saul's family still alive that I could show faithful love for Jonathan's sake?" There was a servant from Saul's household named Ziba, and he was summoned before David. "Are you Ziba?" the king asked. "At your service," he answered. The king asked, "Is there anyone left from Saul's family that I could show God's kindness to?" "Yes," Ziba said to the king, "one of Jonathan's sons whose feet are crippled." "Well, where is he?" the king asked. "He is at the house of Amiel's son, Machir, at Lo-debar," Ziba told the king. Let's pause there for just a moment, because the storyteller is telling us something. Lo-debar translates as nothing, without pasture, without fields. It's the land of nothingness. Mephibosheth is living in the land of nothingness. Let's keep going. Verse 5. So King David had him brought from the house of Amiel's son Machir at Lo-debar. Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson, came to David, and he fell to the ground, bowing low out of respect. "Mephibosheth?" David said. "Yes," he replied, "I'm at your service." Let's pause there just one more moment. The storyteller is telling us something. Mephibosheth translates as the dispeller of shame. Do y'all see what's happening in the story? The dispeller of shame is living in shame in the land of nothingness in Lo-debar. Verse 7, just a couple more verses. "Don't be afraid," David told him, "because I will surely show you faithful love for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the fields of your grandfather Saul, and you will eat at my table always." Mephibosheth bowed low out of respect and said, "Who am I, your servant, that you should care about a dead dog like me?" Then David summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything belonging to Saul and his family. You will work for the land for him. You, your sons, and your servants, and you will bring food into your master's house for them to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will always be at my table." Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my master the king commands." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's own sons. He always ate at the king's table. Now that is a story that holds some power, isn't it? That is a story about who God is. Can you imagine? From a dead dog like me to eating at the king's table as one of the king's own sons. I mean, think about this. Mephibosheth's greatest fear would have been that one day he would wake up and look out the window and the king would be coming down his driveway to execute him, to end it. He's still a threat. And on this day, that great fear actually comes true. He wakes up in the morning, he looks out the window just like every other morning, and this time he sees the king coming for him. And when the king walks through his door, this king does not respond in anger, in vengeance, in violence. This king says, "Mephibosheth, you don't belong here. You don't belong in the land of Lo-debar, the land of nothingness. You, Mephibosheth, belong at my table, and my table is big, and there's a seat for you at this table, and I want you to sit next to me. And by the way, Mephibosheth, when you sit, I then want you to look around, because all I have is yours. All of it." Go back to the old model. Believe, behave, belong. Does it even make sense? I mean, what good would it have done if Mephibosheth believed, even believed all the right things? I mean, what good would it have done if he behaved in all the right ways? He's still living in the land of Lo-Debar, living in the land of nothingness. My brothers and sisters, this story is our story. It's a story about God and us and the power of belonging. And see, maybe you have been living in the land of Lo-Debar. For whatever reason, you have been living in the land of nothingness. And God says, you don't belong there. You don't belong there. You belong at my table. And there's a seat for you at my table. And when you sit, I want you to look around because all I have is yours, all of it. I mean, maybe it's not even about you. Maybe like me, you just know lots of people, acquaintances, family members, friends, people you've encountered who for various reasons have been told they don't truly belong. And I don't know, is it our jobs as the church to proclaim the good news of God's love for all people, especially for the outcast, the marginalized, those who have been kicked to the side, those who have been living in shame? I mean, isn't it our job to proclaim the good news that says God's table is a big table? I mean, do you hear God saying to you, come sit here because there's room for you at the table. This table is big, and when you sit, I want you to look around because all I have is yours. And so in just a minute, we're going to hear a song. It's called Come to the Table by this group called the Sidewalk Prophets. I don't think it's a perfect theology, but it is a song about the table being big enough for all to come to the table. It's about belonging because you have a place here. And so during this song, I want to invite you, if you are one of those types that likes to move around, I invite you to come to the table. We have these little fortune cookie-like blessings, and they're real simple. They just say, I belong, 2 words, I belong. Because maybe you need to be reminded that the reversal is true. I mean, maybe you need to be reminded to take one of those fortune cookie blessings and stick it in your pocket. That maybe you don't know everything you believe about all the Christian tenets of the faith. Maybe you're not sure about all these faith practices, but maybe you need to be reminded that it starts with belonging. Or maybe you don't want to take one and stick it in your pocket, but you want to give one to someone else because they need that same reminder that when it comes to this God stuff, when it comes to the Christian faith, no matter what, no conditions, absolutely no conditions, you belong. And so maybe you want to come up and take one of these and give it to someone else. Also during this song, Sally, Jessica, and myself will be offering just a little blessing on your hand if you'd like it, to remind you that when it comes to the St. Luke's community, no conditions, you belong here. The table is big enough. There's a seat for you at the table. So at this time, if you'd like, I invite you to move. Or if you'd rather sit in your seat and reflect and watch this video, you can do that too.